Welcome everybody. It is 1 o'clock on April 12th, 2021. And my name is Jana Hexter. I am with the Northeastern IPM Center, and I'm happy to welcome you to our Toolbox webinar with our guest, Sara Stahlman today. And she's going to be speaking to us about aquatic invasives in species, rapid response in Pennsylvania, with some fascinating case studies of success and lessons learned. So welcome. And Sara, if you could move to the next slide, that would be great. Okay, we are recording this, and we will have a recording available for you. It takes us a few days because we edit it slightly, and so I will send you an email with a link to the recording. You can also go to the same link here for recordings of all our webinars going back 5 years at this point. Next slide, please. We'd love to hear your questions. It's easier for us to sort through the questions if you use the chat feature rather than the, if you use the Q&A feature rather than the chat. So the Q&A, if you look on your, if you move the mouse over your Zoom, you'll see there's a box at the bottom or the top, and there should be a box in there that says Q&A with two little rectangles. And if you click on that, you can ask questions, and you can do so anonymously. And we have a couple of breaks scheduled, and I will ask Sara your questions as we go along. And if you want to put in some resources, a good place for that is for the chat too. Next slide, please. So I'm happy to introduce our presenter today, Sara Stahlman. She joined the Pennsylvania Sea Grant in 2006 and became the extension leader in July 2017. She's responsible for providing statewide leadership and management for Pennsylvania Sea Grant extension in several key areas, including water quality, climate change, fisheries, invasive species, waterway, and land use planning. So we surely have an expert in our midst with lots and lots of experience, and I'm excited. This is the first toolbox that we've done that's been focused on aquatics, so I'm looking forward to this. So the next slide, please. Okay, so before we begin, we do have some questions for you, and you should see, there we go, the poll just pop up on your screen. There are no right or wrong answers. It's just a way for us to gauge the experience of the people who are on the call. It can give Sara some information about who's here and how she can best tailor the presentation. So I'm just going to be quiet for a few minutes and give you a few minutes to answer these questions. Okay, great. I am going to share the results. Okay, so so we have people who are actively interested in exploring options for aquatic invasive species and looking for tools. So 75% of the people who are on the call are actively looking for ideas, Sara, so no pressure. You've come to the right place is my guess. So, all right, wonderful. So next slide, please. And I think this may be your opportunity, Sara. Okay, I will let you take it away.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you for having me. I'm Sara Stahlman, Extension Lead with Pennsylvania Sea Grant. I feel a lot of pressure being the first aquatic invasive species presentation you guys have had. So I'm very hopeful that some of the information that you hear, you might be able to pull out some tidbits that you can relate to some of the work that you're doing. And if there is interest, I'm hopeful that you'll also reach out afterwards and we can have conversations about how to make that happen. So get started. There we go. So I'm going to take you on a little walk through the Aquatic Invasive Species Rapid Response Plan, which sounds really boring going through a plan, but I'm going to try to spice it up a little bit by sharing some information about actual case studies that have happened and what this looks like in real life application. But of course, to give some background, this is our rapid response plan. Essentially what this is a process for agencies and organizations that are working on aquatic invasive species management. When something new is introduced or something new is found, this provides structure and support and allows for that coordinated process to happen so that people aren't kind of running in all directions, but we know exactly what to do. We know who to contact, we know who to look for resources, and it helps kind of just move us through that process in a more coordinated fashion. We began working on this plan back in 2009, and it's undergone a lot of different revisions. This is a living document. So what we do with the information that I'm going to share with you today is take, learn from it, and adapt the plan so that it's continuously relevant to the folks who are using it. So this is available on the Pennsylvania Sea Grant website. It was last updated in 2019, and we're undergoing a very large update of the plan right now. And I have to give a shout out to the folks that I work with on the Pennsylvania Invasive Species Council. These are individuals who have been involved in this kind of subcommittee to work on rapid response and have been integral in putting this plan together and making it what it is. So the plan is interesting because we have it broken out into kind of 3 tiers or 3 sections. And this was really because when we got started with this process and we brought agency staff to the table and we kind of started working through this, a lot of people were like, this is just so much bulk. Like there's just so much to get through to get to what we're trying to do when something shows up. And so this kind of 3-tiered structure just showed up, and it seemed to really help and work with sifting through a lot of that extraneous information that, especially if you're pretty versed in it, you don't necessarily want to have to go through every time you're looking to do this response. So section 1 is simply the 30,000-foot view of what rapid response looks like in Pennsylvania. It's a decision tree. It's an overview of the actions that you need to take. It is not meant to be used as a standalone, but maybe somebody who's just trying to work their way through the process, they're pretty familiar with it, but they're just trying to get their bearings and they want to look at what it looks like. This is where they can go to say, hey, this is rapid response in Pennsylvania right here in a nutshell. Then if you move on to section 2, this is meant to be a standalone section. And I actually think that this is probably what our agencies are going to be using most often. So this is actually this checklist of I'm doing this, this, this. These are all the steps I have to take. And within the rapid response plan itself, there is a little bit more information to help support what you need to do for each of these actions. But again, it's not overly bogged down with a lot of the very, very detailed information. And so again, this can be used as a standalone. And then if you need more reference, you can move on to section 3. This is where you're going to find that very comprehensive, detailed supporting information for each of the steps that's outlined in the process. So you're going to find things like contact information for your partners. You're going to find some interactive tools to help you make decisions and help you formulate an actual response plan. It's going to provide experts to help in identification. So it's going to be all of that supporting information where if you're in one of those steps in section 2 and you're like, I really don't know who can help me identify what this species actually is, then you could reference section 3 and get that information. So that's kind of just the overview of what our process looks like, the 3 tiers and what the rapid response plan is. Now, I mentioned that this was developed in 2009. It's undergone a lot of revision. This was formally accepted and adopted by the Pennsylvania Invasive Species Council in 2014. So the council recognized this as our process to respond to aquatic invasive species in Pennsylvania. But then came the challenge is, we pulled this all together, we worked on it, but how do we get people to use it and know that it exists and that it's a useful tool for them to use? Especially because this is something that we felt helps provide that structure for communication. When it comes to resources, we all know that time and money and resources are in short supply. And so it always makes more sense to partner with individuals to help leverage additional support when it's needed. And so there's, a lot of positives and pluses to using this plan. And so we decided we needed to think about education and outreach on rapid response and how it can benefit the process in Pennsylvania. So this is where we came up with our mock exercises. So what's a mock exercise? This is essentially an opportunity for us to pull together all the partners that could potentially be involved in one of these rapid responses, including federal partners, state agencies, resource managers, conservation districts, et cetera, and it's to simulate what would happen if this species was found here. And you would go through the process in kind of a practice to see ahead of a real response so that you can kind of work out those kinks, see what works, see what doesn't work, and make adjustments before this actually happens in real life. So I always laugh because one of the ones that we did was hydrilla in Lake Erie in Presque Isle, which I'll talk a little bit more about Presque Isle. This is where the presentation's focused, but people were freaking out. They're like, there's hydrilla in Presque Isle. We're like, no, we're just pretending, it's okay. So we had to be careful kind of how we were publicizing this. But we were thinking about a lake or a reservoir nearby that had hydrillas. And there's a lot, we did a boat survey, there's boats moving back and forth. So it's a real threat, not there yet, but could very well be. So that was one of the focuses of one of our rapid response exercises. So here's a photo from one that we did with the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. This really just gives the water conservation officers, resource managers, anyone working with invasive species a chance to really become deeply familiar with the process, what it looks like, who their partners are, who they're going to be working with. And so here it looks like everyone, is just kind of sitting, listening to a presentation. And some of it's like that. But it's really interesting because you do actually get to get out and do some surveys and get into the field. And these are typically half day to full day exercises. And so they get a lot of value in becoming familiar with the process and really having that understanding, but it's also valuable to us and the process itself, because as I mentioned, this is ultimately a test to see how well our process works and to see what are the gaps, what are the challenges that we need to face so that we can be better prepared when something does show up and we need to act quickly so that it doesn't establish and spread. And so I just wanted to show some of the mock exercises that we have done previously. These started in 2015. We received funding from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative that has supported all of our rapid response activities. And so we did one on starry stonewort. I already mentioned the hydrilla that created the uproar. We focused on New Zealand mud snail, water chestnut, and then most recently, water lettuce and water hyacinth in 2020. And that's actually where I'm going to focus this presentation and the case study that goes along with it. And so I think I'm stopping here. That was kind of the overview of rapid response. And so I wanted to see if anyone had questions regarding, the plan itself, the process, before diving more specifically into looking at a species.
We don't have any questions that have come in yet, but that's often how it happens with these presentations. So again, feel free to put the questions into the Q&A, and at the next break, I can ask them from Sarah. I actually am kind of curious on one level around, are people more open to the idea of these mock exercises and the rapid response planning in light of, the last year? Because I'm wondering if people now are aware of the need for this kind of pre-planning for big things that we think are not going to be happening immediately.
Yeah, so this is interesting because I think most of the actual exercises themselves have been pre-COVID and have been kind of before we had to worry about meeting face-to-face. And so I'll kind of talk a little bit about, the water hyacinth and water lettuce one, and that was actually during COVID and kind of how that one went. But what we started to see is during the pandemic and kind of during this social distancing and working from home, we started to see a lot more infestations happening in Pennsylvania. So I felt like it was constantly, we're getting, notifications that this species is found here where it hasn't been found before, and so on and so forth. And I was thinking, about a lot of it is just because of, people getting outside to do a lot of outdoor activities. And so that kind of helped, bump up the need for education and outreach when people are going to the park or going to the beach. Because there's really not a lot of other things for them to do during a pandemic. And so being outside has kind of been the main thing. So we definitely saw an increase in the number of infestations that we've seen in Pennsylvania. And so I think that just helps, show the significance and importance of having a process like this in place.
Oh, interesting. And thank you. As I say, and we have one question that came in. Is the rapid response plan adaptable to non-aquatic invasive species?
I definitely think it could be. I think that what we tried to do with this was create more of a model. And so originally we were thinking that this could be a model for species specific plans. And it's highly adaptable, and it could be used for a number of different things. And so I think if you follow the general structure of what it looks like, and that's looking at, I'm sure it works exactly the same way, of needing to look for partners and needing to look for resources, needing to look for funding, needing to think about education and outreach. All of those things are outlined in the plan. And I think that those are all important, whether you're looking at terrestrial or you're looking at aquatic species.
Terrific. Well, we have another question, but let's move on and we can ask that at the next break.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so like I mentioned, I'm going to take you on a journey through the rapid response plan with looking at these two species in mind, because this is kind of the most recent one and it happened during the pandemic. And I kind of viewed it as a success with opportunities for learning as well. And so this infestation occurred where I live here in Erie, Pennsylvania. And I don't know if you're familiar with Erie. I don't know how wide reaching the audience is here, but we're located in the northwest corner of Pennsylvania, right on Lake Erie. And right at the tip, there is this 3,200 acre sandy peninsula that juts out into Lake Erie. And it has numerous beaches. It's got trails, bike trails, kayaking, boating, anything that you could think of. And it brings in 4 million visitors per year to this park. And so there's a lot of tourism and a lot of movement in and out of Presque Isle. And so the area that I have circled there is part of a lagoon system. And within that lagoon system, there's no motorized boats allowed in there, but a lot of people will go back there to kayak or canoe mostly. And so this is an area that is right off the road. There's an access point there where I have that red circle, and it's an area called Low Bridge. And it's interesting because in 2014, we found starry stonewort at this exact location. And then in 2020, it was late September or late August, early September, that these two species were both found at this location, most likely due to aquarium releases. So it seems like there's something about that Low Bridge location where people stop and kind of drop things off. We also have a red-eared slider control program on the park and numerous invasive plants. And, I could go on and on, but it's a very ecologically diverse and important area. So the species were found, and the very first step in the rapid response plan is to report the infestation to the Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator. So there's a couple different ways in Pennsylvania that you can do this. The Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission is typically going to be the entity that has jurisdictional authority over aquatic invasive species in Pennsylvania. Not all the time. In this case, they're not, but we'll go into that in a minute. But they do have a reporting form that goes to the Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator. We do get a lot of reports that come in through IMAP Invasives, and this is a program, the mapping and tracking initiative that's coordinated through the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy in Pennsylvania. And then we also have a field guide smartphone app, which I will go through in the next slide to give you just a little bit more detail on this tool because it's pretty cool. So we developed a field guide, a hard copy version of the field guide that's waterproof, small enough to kind of fit in your hand as you're going out into the field. It has over 60 different species in it. They're all organized by taxa, and you can kind of search through them. Right now, unfortunately, this is only for Apple phones. It's only for the iOS system just because we have limited funding. And so right now, if you go to the Apple store and you type in PAAIS, you will find the app. We are currently working right now on developing the Android version. And so we're hoping to have the Android version out in the fall. But for now, sorry, we had to choose a platform, and that's what it is. So within the app, you can look at a species, look at pictures of that species. It talks about different lookalike species. It shows you the typical habitat where that species is found, how it spreads, and distribution by county within Pennsylvania. And then it also gives you an opportunity right within the app. So if you're out in the field, you have your phone with you, as most people do, you can snap a picture. It will pin you so that it knows your geolocation. It can get your coordinates. And then you can fill in the information, hit submit, and you've just submitted something directly to the coordinator, the Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator. So this is a really useful tool that has only been out for about a year or so now, but we have quite a few downloads of it, and the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission water conservation officers have all been instructed to download and use this app. So this is one of the ways that things get reported in Pennsylvania. However, the twist to this story in the very first step, that's not what happened with this species. So this is a Facebook post that I was actually laying in bed one morning on Facebook, just scrolling around, and I see this post where it talks about these 2 species of plants that were found on Presque Isle State Park. And so automatically I'm thinking, oh man, this is something bad. It hasn't been here before. Is somebody doing the rapid response plan? Is this following what's supposed to be happening? And it wasn't, which was disappointing, but also an opportunity to think about why it isn't happening. And so I had reached out to the contact at the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, as well as the AIS coordinator, and said, hey, have you guys heard about this? And they were like, no, we haven't heard about it. I said, well, I saw it on Facebook. So there's a gap in knowledge on what to do when something's found in Pennsylvania. And so we took that as an opportunity to act on improving reporting, not just the ways that you can report, but also the awareness of what to do when something is found. And so there is an invasive species hotline that Pennsylvania has through the, it's one hotline for a bunch of different species. So there's like the bad bugs hotline if you want to report a bug. There's a plant hotline, but there wasn't an option for aquatic invasive species. So we called the Department of Agriculture, said, hey, can we jump on this reporting hotline and get an aquatics reporting? And so we have our own mailbox now, but it still was bugging me because the number, which I have up here, is 1-866-253-7189. Like, no one's going to remember that. If you're out in the field, you're not going to know that. And so I was really adamant about trying to come up with something where, yeah, we have a field guide app, we have an online reporting forum, but there's a lot of people that don't use that kind of stuff. Maybe they're not technologically savvy, or maybe they just want to get on the phone and call somebody. So right now we're working really hard to figure out, I didn't think how it would be so hard, but vanity numbers, it's really hard. Everything's taken. So we've been sitting and like putting in options for like months now. And the best that we could come up with so far is 1-833 invasive without the E. So we're still looking at things, but this is one of the options that we have that make it a little bit easier to remember when you're out there and you see something weird. If you see something, say something, that's an option that we're going to add into the process for them. And then kind of surrounding this, we're planning on doing a social media blitz on invasive species reporting, kind of using a tagline similar to that. If you see something, say something, with the new number, with the different reporting mechanisms with the app, and just blasting out through all of our partners so that everybody's aware, and we create a little bit more awareness in the state of what happens when you find something. So even though it didn't get reported initially the way we would have hoped, things flowed pretty well as far as reporting after that. So bear with me with the wordy slide, but the reporting kind of looked like this. Within the state, DCNR, the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, they're the jurisdictional agency that then has responsibility over implementing rapid response, because the observation was found in Presque Isle State Park, and they're the agency that operates Presque Isle State Park. But they don't work in a silo. All the other agencies were notified as well. Fish and Boat Commission as it relates to managing AIS in Commonwealth waters, the Department of Ag, because it manages the Pennsylvania Noxious Weed List, the Department of Environmental Protection as it relates to the Clean Water Act and potential waterway impairments. And so everyone was pulled in and made aware of this issue. Federally, the USGS, looking at GLANCIS, the Great Lakes Aquatic Non-Indigenous Species Information System, as well as the US Fish and Wildlife Service, due to their involvement with the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and then also IMAP invasive. So there's a very large communication network that happens when something's found, and it's definitely not perfect. And so we actually have conversations coming up to continue having conversations about making sure that people are brought in at the correct stage of the rapid response process, and that we're not missing anybody, and that all partners are notified. So once we have the notification piece and everyone kind of knows what's going on, the next step is to really identify and verify. So, somebody might say, hey, I found this, but it might not be what you're thinking it is. And so there has to be some kind of a verification process. And so within the rapid response plan, there's a little snapshot here, but there's a whole list of identification experts that you can reference. So if you're like, I really don't know what this is and I don't know who to call, there are resources listed in the rapid response plan so that you can just quickly reference that and choose the most appropriate option. In this case, the individuals who found the aquatic plants are pretty much aquatic plant experts. And so they knew right away. And so the step was kind of done right away because they would have been somebody who would have been contacted anyways to verify. And so that was kind of a quick and easy step within this case study. Oh, and I'm stopping again for questions.
Great. All right, we do have a couple of questions. Do you recommend using ICS for invasive species responses, and are there things that trigger the use of ICS?
So ICS came up a lot when we were in the development of this. And actually, I'm giving a presentation on Friday to the ANS task force, and they pushed the use of ICS. And I think they want to know why we're not using ICS. So I'm not looking forward to that presentation, but there are reasons. So when we first started kind of planning this, it was a lot of, I would say Pennsylvania has been a little bit more behind when it comes to having aquatic invasive species capacity and resources. And so just until this past year, we didn't have an aquatic invasive species coordinator. We've had a couple of people working on invasive species that weren't even their main job. So we haven't had a lot of full-time capacity to devote on the agency level to aquatic invasive species and to rapid response, which is why I'm with Sea Grant. We do mostly education and outreach, but we were poised to kind of step in and help facilitate the process and get this going. But most other states, it's usually the agencies that are involved in the rapid response process more so than a Sea Grant program. So there was a lot of concern about the intensity of the ICS structure and, you know, the planning P and all of the different meetings that happen, and they wanted more flexibility. So it was mainly our agencies speaking up and saying, we don't think this will work for us. We need something a little bit more flexible and not as intensive, and that follows along kind of with the process that we feel will work best for us. So I don't really have a great answer. We do have ICS listed in our rapid response plan in one of the appendices where it says there might be situations where ICS is appropriate. And that should be evaluated and decided upon based on the situation. But in general, it's not the planning P that we're going through.
Great, thank you. Somebody asked, actually this would be better probably for you to type later, but what Facebook do you use, PAC grant or PISC? So that might be better for you to put.
Sure, I can follow up with that.
Okay, great. And then there's one more question. When you say that I actually wondered this myself, when you say there are more infestations that are being reported, is it that more are being reported because people are outdoors, or do you think there's a measured increase in infestations?
That is a very good point and a good question. I guess that there's no way for me to necessarily know. Most of the way that I'm finding out about these is through agencies and through IMAP Invasive. So I did notice, so I don't know if folks use IMAP or not on this webinar, but you can sign up to get alerts. And so, you know, I was just getting alert after alert after alert that this species was found in this new location and this species was found and this species was found. It was actually pretty quiet for a while there. So it could be that more people are outside seeing things when they haven't necessarily noticed them or seen them before, or it could be that there's more actual introductions happening. I think it just depends on, and I'm not an expert on every single one of them. It could be looking at, you know, the different age classes and the abundance to see like how long has this been here, because that could help answer that question. But I don't have that information at the tip of my brain, but I think both of them could be what's going on.
Great. All right, wonderful. Well, we can move on, and feel free to put more questions in the Q&A if you have them as we move along.
Okay. Okay, so we've reported, we have identified and verified. And so now that we know that what we're looking at is actually what we're looking at, there's kind of this preliminary risk assessment process that takes place. And this kind of falls on the agency, again, that has this jurisdictional authority to make this determination. So, and this is kind of like, hey, are we going to move forward with this, or what are we going to do with this? Is this worth our time? And so a couple of the initial questions that get asked: is the species already known in the area? This is actually something I copy and pasted out of the rapid response for these two species. And so, Nick answered these questions and said, no, this is not a species already known in the area. Is the species able to survive the climate? Yes, although literature suggests it's not likely to thrive under exposure to harsh winter conditions. But I also looked water lettuce up on the different U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service risk screenings that they have available. And I pulled out the climate map here to the side, so you can kind of see for yourself that there is suitable climate in our location for this species. And then for that location, is there an existing report of higher risk species to which resources will be allocated? In which Nick answered, many other invasive species are at this location and actions and resources should be coordinated appropriately. So basically this is saying, for example, if somebody reports Phragmites on Presque Isle State Park, there is a lot of Phragmites on Presque Isle State Park. So with a report like that, you would say, is the species already known in this area? Yes, it's already being treated. It's already being worked on. This is not necessarily a high priority report. And so the other kind of piece is looking at a species that maybe is introduced alongside of it that doesn't have the same kind of impact as, maybe another species that has had a lot of known impacts in other areas where it's been introduced, and then the resources might be allocated there. So there is that opportunity where you might have to prioritize the species and who's going to get your attention. Again, limited resources. So ultimately it was determined here that yes, this is a species of high priority. It has a high impact potential for the intended ecological and recreational uses of the water in which it was found. And again, Presque Isle State Park is very valuable and used, especially recreationally, water body, very biodiverse. And so we don't want to see species running amok in it. So this was considered a high risk species. So once we make that decision, hey, we are going to invest our time, we are going to invest our resources in this species, the next step is to go in and do a site assessment. And this is essentially, what information do we know? This is looking for every possible detailed information piece that you could pull out of the site, of the abundance, is the species reproducing there? So with using the water hyacinth and water lettuce as an example, going in, the geographic extent was mostly localized. They did remove a few dozen plants, but additional plants and reproductive material were still present in the area. Again, most likely a result of aquarium dumping at Low Bridge. There was evidence, or there was not evidence of reproduction, but they did find stolen buds, but there was no flowering structures. And then other notes about infestation. The location of this report overlaps with starry stonewort, which I mentioned, but also threatened and endangered species present in the area. And it occurs within that popular recreational waterway that's very easily accessed. So this is also an opportunity, and I don't have an example of this here just for not having an overly cramped slide, where you can also make notes of the information. This is all the information you have, but also what information do you need or would you like to have that you could follow up on. So once we kind of go through that information gathering and getting as much as we can to be able to make decisions about what to do, we focus on objectives of the response. And so, you've got to know what you're trying to do to choose the best way to do it. So we spend some time thinking about this, and it seems like eradication is the obvious response here, but that's not always the case, as it's not always feasible. So there are other things that you need to consider when you're thinking about goals and objectives, and there may be multiple goals and objectives that go along with it. And so with this particular instance, a goal was to avoid further ecological harm and maintain suitable conditions for recreational activities of the park. And there's various objectives that fall within wanting to achieve that goal. So this is one of those tools I mentioned in the beginning, that there's kind of interactive tools within the rapid response plan to really help you sit down and make decisions and think about things. And this is our response options template. So this is more of that just brain dump. It could be anything and everything, and considering all possible options on the table to figure out what's the most feasible, what makes the most sense, what can we afford, what partners do we have to help support the effort. And so this one, and I'm going to go into another fairly wordy slide, but I wanted to show you what the brain dump looked like for water hyacinth and water lettuce, in that we thought about, hey, what if we did nothing? Due to it being high risk, that wasn't recommended. We had already decided that this is something we were going to take action on, but it's still something you could do. Talked about things like intensified surveillance for the species, prevention activities, source reduction, education, mechanical removal, physical alterations, genetic and cultural, biological, legal. So all of the things that are listed here are things that we sat down at the table and just kind of thought about, what can we do about this? And I highlighted the ones that ended up as things that the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources decided to move forward with. Although I do have an error here, the mechanical removal should be highlighted, as that was one of the first things that they did when they found the infestation, was to try to pull what they could. So they identified several different responses and actions that could be taken based on brainstorming and thinking about resources and partners. So this is the part where they sit down and really figure out who's going to take the lead. How are we going to implement this? Where's the funding come from? Is everybody at the table that should be at the table? So there's an action plan template also that exists within the rapid response plan that helps you kind of lay all of this out, and really just get down into the nitty gritty details to make sure that we're crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. And I didn't include this. I kind of wish I would, but there was an email from Nick Decker that came through, and he was like a rock star of identifying all of the individuals for all of the pieces. So I have up here kind of all of these highlighted actions, and he identified who was to take the lead on each of those actions. Everybody knew exactly what they were doing. So for the education piece, the aquatic invasive species signage and disposal stations, I was actually assigned to help work with other members of the park on developing some signage for Low Bridge, because we identified, hey, this is happening more than one time. There's a lot of species being found here. Let's develop some signage so that people can see that, you shouldn't be dumping anything at this location. And so everyone kind of had their job and everybody knew what they were doing. And so, of course, once you implement something, you want to evaluate and make sure that your intended consequences are happening and they're happening the way you wanted them to happen. So, was the response successful after doing these things? And sometimes you don't know that right away. We still don't know that with water lettuce and water hyacinth, because we're still working on that. There's progress being made. Everyone's checking in and seeing where we're at, and we're getting updates. But you don't always know that right away. But it's an opportunity to talk about, did the mechanics of the plan work? What are the gaps or sticking points? Like things that come up pretty frequently when we have these conversations are things like legislation and permitting, and funding always comes up as kind of the biggest one. And then we can have the discussion about what modifications are needed to the process before the next effort, so that we're not just like doing the same mistakes over and over again. So some key outcomes and lessons learned from this whole process. Ultimately, the mock exercises and the case studies, these all help us to increase our knowledge about the plan and how to use it. It increases coordination, communication, and networking. And I quoted this because this was one of the evaluations we got from a mock exercise where somebody said, hey, I know what role I play now. I know what to do in the future. I got some cool feedback from Nick Decker after this water hyacinth and water lettuce initially went down. And he said, man, I was so overwhelmed when I looked at the rapid response plan. Like there was so many steps and it was so tedious to like fill it out. And he was like, at first I was like, I just don't know. But then ultimately he said that it resulted in less work moving forward. Everything was planned out and that it ran a lot more smoothly, having done that work on the back end to move things forward quickly and efficiently. So I was really kind of happy to hear that. And, sorry, it's not going to be easy, but you did the work and you benefit from it. And like I said, everybody knows what they're doing now and is moving forward with taking action on those 2 species. So I consider that somewhat of a success. So after each of the mock exercises, one of the things that we do is create these after action reports. And some of these are available on our website. Some of them aren't, but if anyone's interested in looking at them, I'm happy to share them. But essentially what this is a summary of the exercise, kind of what the exercise was, what the scenario was, what the conversations looked like, what the questions looked like, and what were the gaps and challenges to be discussed and thought about moving forward and updating the rapid response plan. So I have not created the after action report yet for these 2 plant species that we're talking about, but it's one of those things that will get done and that will help us to inform as we're working actively right now to update the rapid response plan. And so some of the things that, this is actually pulled out of one of the after action reports and thinking about different issues and then suggestions for improving those particular issues. And so, for example, lack of funding for rapid response outside of Lake Erie watershed, because the Lake Erie watershed, we get Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding. That doesn't exist everywhere. And we don't have this emergency rapid response funding across the state. So we've had a lot of conversations about how to kind of improve the funding issue, especially because, you can come up with all of these plans and have all these things you want to do, but if you can't support the activities, then you can't do any of it. So it's kind of been one of our main things here, but I won't read through all of these, but I'm going into some next steps. So that'll help give some more insight on what's in some of those cells there. So again, I just spoke about funding. So we're actually pulling together a funding matrix within the rapid response plan. This does not exist in there currently. So if you look at the 2019 plan, you won't see it, but we're working on pulling it together. And this is a list of various grants that support aquatic invasive species response activities and control. And so if you're really stuck on trying to find funding to respond to something, you can look here and say, oh, I could apply here, here, and here. Not ideal, of course, because grants take a while. So rapid response is always, not always rapid. We're also working on pulling together prisms in Pennsylvania, similar to the New York's prism structure, where there would be funding provided that way. And so we have some things in the works, but funding has been one of our biggest drawbacks. Some feedback that we also got was that, hey, we want to see what people are doing. Like if I find water chestnut and I know that Mercer County Conservation District has already dealt with water chestnut, then I can reach out to them and not reinvent the wheel. And so we identified all of these different responses where we could get case study information and share kind of what went successfully and maybe what didn't go so well with some of these different infestations. Folks wanted to see information on permitting. So there's a new section that's going to be added on permitting guidance, what permits you might need to have, how much do they cost, what do you need to consider? And then another one that came up was we'd like to see best management practices for control. And so this is one that I'm working on right now. It's a little challenging because a lot of this exists outside and, it's another don't reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of outside resources and websites that have this information. So we're working on how to kind of pull those into the rapid response plan without adding like a huge amount of information, and always, we don't want it to be a link farm either. So right now we're having conversations about how best do we share information about controlling species. And then I just wanted to end by sharing some of Pennsylvania Sea Grant's resources beyond just rapid response and some of the work that we're doing there. We mainly focus on education and outreach on aquatic invasive species. We develop a lot of outreach materials. You can go to our website and you'll find various fact sheets for more than 63 different species. There's some that are very species focused. There's others that are vector focused. So we kind of have some tips for here's the waterfowl hunter one. We have tips for boaters, tips for anglers, tips for scuba divers, tips for teachers, tips for water gardeners. I could go on and on. So, if you fall into one of those categories, there's things that you can be thinking about with regard to not spreading invasive species. So we do have fact sheets that are available. I do have hard copies. I actually had a conservation district just reach out to me recently and say, hey, can you provide these copies for me? And I gave him copies, but also there was one fact sheet that I couldn't provide copies for. So we're helping fund him to print those. So we do have funding to help support printing some of these if you don't have the funding to do that. I've already mentioned the Aquatic Invasive Species Field Guide. We also have hard copies of these still available. So if anybody was interested in having one, there is a PDF on our website. So if you just wanted to kind of look at it digitally, you could do that too. But if you were really interested in having a hard copy of this, you can let me know. Education resources. If anybody's involved in any type of education programming for invasive species, we do have a lot of items that we can loan out. What you're looking at is the Aquatic Invasive Species Attack Packs. And this is a lot of times for school programs and school groups, but there's these little acrylic block specimens that kids really like to get their hands on. I should have put a picture. I always do these presentations. I'm like, oh, I should have done this, but there's this really nasty lamprey that they preserved and you can actually hold it like it's the actual lamprey. And it always grosses the kids out, but that's what they want to hold because it's cool and gross. And, so then you can talk about lamprey. And so we do loan those out for periods of time and then people give them back and we loan them out again, but it's just chock full of different activities and curriculum and fact sheets. And you can see the Asian carp posters that we have too. Watch cards, you can see the Northern Snakehead watch card. Those are for kind of identification as well. And they're just kind of small little reminder cards for keep an eye out for this in your area. And then I already mentioned how we helped to develop signage for Low Bridge. This is something that we also work a lot with agencies on developing signage. So the one that says clean your gear, we actually developed these signs to be put at all significant water access points in Pennsylvania. There's a boater version, there's an angler version, and this is the non-motorized boat version. So we do have these signs available too if anyone finds interest in them. And we also can help develop signage for locations where it's needed as well. So I hope I didn't go over my time. I feel like I've been talking forever, so I'm sorry, but hopefully you found some information that might be transferable for some of the work that you're doing. And again, my contact information's here. Our website's there, so you can visit, take a look at resources, reach out to me if you have questions after this presentation that I didn't get a chance to answer. And thank you for your time and attention.
Great, wonderful. We do have a few questions and we have some time to ask them. So the first is, how difficult and time consuming is it to come up with genetic solutions?
I'm not the one to answer that question. I facilitate the rapid response process to get people talking and thinking about those things, but I do not come up with genetic solutions or work more, directly with the specific control options. That would probably be more of a Fish and Boat Commission or even more of the federal level question, but sorry, I can't answer that.
Okay, that's great. And Steve Young said, do you have more artificial lakes than natural lakes? And artificial ones would probably increase the likelihood of invasives there, if that's a question, I think.
So, I mean, we have a lot of lakes. I don't have, stats on exactly, but we have both natural and we have artificial lakes. I don't have information on the likelihood. I was kind of thinking about hydrilla, and when I was talking about that, the reservoir, it's huge. I think it's like 17,000 acres or something like that, and it straddles Pennsylvania and Ohio, and there's species there that have been like a problem, and then as soon as hydrilla showed up, they're not even a problem anymore. Like hydrilla is the problem, and so there's definitely locations that are man-made lakes that provide invasive species, but I don't have a good grasp on whether you get more from natural lakes or from artificial lakes or anything like that.
Okay, great. Michelle Niedermeyer asked, dumping seems to be a common problem that leads to aquatic invasive species in new areas. as part of the signage and other outreach, are alternatives to dumping these species suggested or provided?
So that's a really good question, and actually kind of falls in line with one of the programs that I'm currently working on. So I mentioned that at Prescott State Park, we have red-eared sliders, and that's a problem because those are species that are most likely released. And it's not surprising why. I used to work at a pet store when I was little. It was like my first job that I ever had when little, like 16. And the turtles were so cute, and we just sold them like candy. They get to be 10 to 12 inches in diameter and they live for like 30 years. And so that's a commitment that a lot of people just aren't thinking about when they take them home. And so in their minds, they're thinking, okay, you know, my son Timmy's going off to college now. I don't want to take care of this turtle. It's a turtle. It can survive in the environment. I'm going to let it go. So there isn't a lot of thought, you know, about what happens after the fact. And so with this red-eared slider control program that we're doing, it's kind of sad because we're trapping them, and then unfortunately we have to euthanize them because you can't just take something out of the water and you know and give it to somebody else. And so we're really working hard right now, especially in Erie and statewide, to have conversations about pet amnesty. We're holding our very first ever pet amnesty event on May 1st. And so this is a surrender event where people that have unwanted aquarium pets are able to bring them back. We partnered with the Herps Alive Foundation, which is based out of Cleveland, Ohio, as well as the Erie Humane Society, to accept these animals where they will not be euthanized. They will be either rehomed responsibly, or they will remain at the sanctuary there. So this is kind of the first step that we're taking with regards to this issue, to offer, you know, other alternatives and say, you know, you don't have to release this. There's better options. You know, be a hero, release zero is kind of one of the things that we're stealing from, I think, Illinois, Indiana uses that a lot and does a lot of work with organisms and trade. So yeah, I think that I'm hoping that that program will expand so that we'll be able to provide alternatives to release. And that'll also include, we're doing an art contest with the Girl Scouts. So they're going to be drawing, like, you know, don't release, and we'll be sharing those on social media. So we're hoping that'll raise a lot of awareness.
Terrific. Wonderful. Thank you. And our director, Deb Grantham, had a couple of comments for people and for you directly. The Northeastern IPM Center and the 3 other regional IPM centers in the South, Midwest, and West offer small grants each year, and the competition for those open in the fall, so usually in September, and there's a due date in November. So just in case people have projects that they're thinking might be a good fit for that. I'm actually the coordinator for that. So, and then the other is that EdMaps is an important resource for information on species and controlling species. And the link for that is in the Q&A. So, so you will see that in the recording. So wonderful. And well, that's all the questions and comments. And Sarah, if you could scroll forward for me, that would be great. Oh, we did that piece. There you go.
Where am I going? There we go. Okay.
Okay, great. So we have a Find a Colleague feature on our website. People like Sarah can go in there and put up a profile of the kind of work that they're doing, what they're interested in, the kind of partnerships they'd be interested in. And so you can scroll through there and find potential partners for projects, and also put a profile up for yourself. It's our way of increasing collaboration in the region. So it's region-wide. And so we invite you to go there, see if you're looking for a colleague in aquatic invasive species. If Sarah is up there yet, she's the first one probably, but it's a good way of finding each other. Sometimes it's researchers, it can be extension people, but it can also be landowners and farmers and practitioners. So if you're having a research project and you're looking for a collaborator, it's a great way to go as well. So the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the recording is going to be available, and I will send you a link to that probably later in this week or early next week. Next slide. And I want to acknowledge we receive our funding through NIFA and part of USDA. And without their funding, we wouldn't be able to put these together. We wouldn't be able to invite Sara. So I do want to start our poll, which is for very short questions. And just to have a sense of how useful this was for you and what you may be taking away from it. And I will give you a few minutes to do that. Okay, so I will share the results. So people are more likely to be interested in using the AIS and interested in learning more about the resources, and you have some takers on different parts of the materials that are available. And how more likely are you to increase your use of IPM, which is a question we love to see a good response to. And most people said very likely or extremely likely. And the person who said not at all likely probably is not relevant for them, is my guess. So with that, I want to give a bow to Sara, to say thank you very, very much for all the time that it's taken to put this presentation together, but also everything that's gone into you being able to give this presentation, all the years of dedication and hours of work and studying, and I'm sure it's deeply appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, all right. Okay, with that, we will end this presentation.